Good morning, everyone. My name is Shilpa, and I welcome you all to the CPP India User Group community. Thank you for joining in for today's session. The aim of this community is to bring people together who have similar interest in learning or expanding their knowledge about C++ and also provide them with a platform to discuss, share, or showcase their work done primarily in C++ language. As always, I will take few minutes to give you some important information about how you can interact with the community. You can actively interact with our community by joining our Discord channel. You might have already received an email with all the links when you had registered for this session. In case not, please reach out to me, Dheeraj, or Vishal, and we can help you out. Let me give you some reasons as to why you should join our Discord channel. All the latest happenings related to our upcoming sessions are shared on our Discord channel, so you won't miss any important update if you will join it. We also do post questions on our Discord channel from time to time, wherein you would have to guess what is the output of the program or what's the problem with the code snippet. In this way, either you would be learning something new or you would get the revision of one of the concepts that you have learned already. So do join our Discord channel to get your weekly dose of C++. The last thing that I would like to mention is that post this session, you will get a feedback form. Please spare the few minutes to fill this form as your feedback will help us to improve these sessions. I think I'm done with all of my boring stuff, so let's begin with the interesting session. Today we have Harishankar here who will give some insight into how to write clean code which is easy to read and maintain. Harishankar has more than 15 years of experience in various domains like media, AI, speech recognition, and ML. Harishankar has now decided to take his passion for C++ and OOPS to the next level and has now become an independent trainer since April 2020. Without further ado, let me hand over to Harishankar. Harishankar?
Okay. Uh, Thanks, Shilpa. So, thanks for the nice introduction. So, I'll not, take more time talking about me or things like that. So, I'll just, quickly tell you what I'm going to talk about today. So, I mean, I have divided my whole talk in mainly three parts. So, the first one is basically main thing. I mean, before jumping into this principles or solid or clean code, the kind of problems we have. Okay, so until you don't understand the problem, I mean, jumping on the solution is not going to help. So, first of all, to understand what exactly kind of problems we face and how these problems makes our life really difficult in the software engineering or software world. So first part would be focusing on that. You can see now.
Yes, we can see.
Yeah. So in the second part we would be focusing on how these principles, what exactly these principles are, and how these principles helps us and how to apply them, basically looking at the some code examples where these principles are violated and what kind of problems we face when we violate these kind of principles, and then the refactored code, how to refactor those code and take care of these principles, and finally the Q&A. So having said that, let me start with the session today. So now the most important part, I mean, the problem side, which we discuss, right, always. So generally, I mean, what goes wrong with the software? This is the important and pertinent question we should ask ourselves. I mean, what kind of things, I mean, if we have something to some solution to solve a problem, what kind of things, or what kind of problems, or what goes wrong with the software? So I mean, let's ask few questions from us. I mean, or before going further, I mean, there is a perception, right? I mean, the solid principles comes, kind of, advanced part of the software and things like that, because it is related to designing and something like that. So I will try to make it, I mean, somehow, some way that even it is good for to understand even for beginners, and I mean all the people, those who are attending this session. So I'm sure, I mean, these kind of problems everyone would have faced in, when they work on software or when they write code. So there are few questions we should always ask before, I mean, looking at the solution. Like, how many of us, slowed down because of bad code? What actually, makes us slow when we write a code? So in my 15 years of career, I have seen most of the time what happens. In fact, every programmer, every developer gets slowed down in the process when he's trying to develop something, when he's writing a code, just because of bad code. Okay, we know that. When we have a bad code, and we always see these kind of problems when we write software, right? So when we know that, bad code is not, some bad code is something which slows us down in the development process and things like that, then why do we write code that slows us down? That is the, this is the question we should ask ourselves when we are, working with the software, when we write code. So generally there is a perception. I have personally seen in my career, like when engineers write a code, right? So there are a lot of deadlines, pressure, and things like that. So because of those kind of tight deadlines, people, tend to fix that problem, kind of disaster management. Okay, put some hack and give it as soon as possible. There is a lot of pressure from the management and managers and things like that. But the simple fact we should understand, friends, here, that you don't go fast by writing crap. Because today you might be fixing it, but tomorrow when you are again going to revisit that code, it will again take a lot of time, right? So you don't go fast by just rushing. You don't go fast by making releases, doing hacks and all those things, right? So how we go fast, basically? So you go fast by deliberately, not rapidly. This we should understand. So if you have any problem when you're writing code, you should take time to analyze the problem, and you should always try to solve it in a proper way, rather than you just doing a disaster management. And most of the time, I have, in my experience, I have seen these people, just get stuck because of these kind of things. They want to go fast, so they just write some code and do some hack. It is always good to tell upfront, right? That, okay, it will take some time. I want to solve it in a proper way, and take time, analyze it properly, and then I think we should go for the solution. So now I'll ask a one question from everyone. Many of us are, from the same field. Some certain level of experience. How many of you works directly with the customer projects, and how many of you, for example, works in the kind of R&D related stuff, when you are directly related with R&D stuff, and when you are directly facing the customer related projects? I think I'm sure. A lot more people might be working into the customer facing project, and few must be working with the R&D stuff. So I have this personal experience. Generally people, those who works in R&D, if you ask them to work on customer projects, they are tend to be slow. Because I mean at the customer facing project, there is a lot of pressure. You have to release in time. As soon as possible you have to make a release. So the moment this kind of pressure comes in, you tend to do mistakes, because you are, just keeping the time into consideration, not, the proper solution. But the R&D guy, when he goes and, start working on the customer projects, it is he is generally slow. The reason being, because when you're working on the R&D side or something like that, you take your time to analyze the problem properly and things like that, and then you apply those problems, those solution into the problems in a proper way. So basically, the point is, we always take time is in consideration, rather than telling upfront that yes, we need some time to analyze the problem and we will solve it in a proper way. So now the question comes, when this kind of things happens. So what exactly we how we can define what is bad code actually, right? So there are few things. You might have experienced in your career. Mainly, if you see, the code which is confusing when you try to read that code, right? If you try to look into the code, it's simply confusing. If at all a code is confusing, it's a bad code actually. The code should be self-explanatory. A good code is always self-explaining. Recently I was going through, one of the article where people were discussing, a lot more senior people were discussing that what we should do. In our code, should we have, comments, proper comments? How many comments, or what kind of comments we should have? So there was an interesting discussion came out, saying that, if you are writing a very good code, you don't need any kind of, comments, because your code explains itself what exactly it is doing. So simple. if you are confused when you're reading a code, and if people gets confused by reading your code and things like that, you should be careful that yes, I mean there is something wrong with the code. It should not be confusing. And what happens when we try to modify bad code, right? So lot of thing goes right. I mean, the moment you start changing and modifying this bad code, I mean, obviously it makes you slow. So these things are very important to understand, like what actually a bad code is and what kind of problem basically we solve when we talk about these kind of principles. So let's talk about the symptoms of the bad code. What are the symptoms of the bad code? So the first symptom of the bad code is rigidity. So when I say rigidity means the code is rigid. I mean, for example, let's take an example. You got some requirement. You want to change something in module one. So you are changing some module, and then you realize, oh, I mean, if I'm changing here, then I have to change into other module. Then if you are changing that module, you realize, okay, I mean, because I'm changing here, there is some dependency into other module that also I have to change. So the code that cannot handle isolated changes, I mean, even though it is not dependent, it had a lot of dependencies and coupling, right? So if you are changing at one place, your dependencies are spread across the module, so you are end up changing the multiple places. This kind of code is called rigid code. Okay. Now the second symptom is fragility. What fragility means? Like for example, suppose you have got some bug into your code, and then you try to fix that code and it breaks at some other place, even though they were not dependent. So I mean your code becomes so fragile that you try to change at one place, even a single line of code, it tend to break at other place, right? So this kind of code is basically called the fragile code. I mean, I'm sure you might have seen, because I have this experience personally, that where we had some module, and when we used to change one particular line, it was kind of it used to break multiple places. So it was too fragile that it was very difficult to maintain that kind of code. So that kind of code where you have fragility, I mean, this is another symptom of the bad code. Now, the third is non-reusability. What is basically non-reusability? Now, for example, suppose you have some already written code. Someone has written that code, and your manager comes and asks you, okay, I mean, what is the estimation and things like that. You provided some estimation, but he says, okay, argues with you, okay, this code is already being done by this particular developer. Why don't you go and take that code and integrate into your things, and you must be taking some less amount of time now. The moment you go and talk to that developer, you realize that, okay, I mean, his code is, I mean, coupled with lot of framework and things like that, which is not desirable to you, right? So if it is not, I mean, you don't need some code, but still you are getting that code as part of the part of the code which you want to use. So now, at some point of time, you realize, okay, I mean, it is better that I should only write this code rather than taking that code. So basically, the coupling between the desirable part of the code and undesirable part of the code is too much that you cannot reuse, or you cannot use that code, is called non-reusability. This is another symptom of the bad code. So, I mean, these are the symptoms we should always, see, and we always find. I mean, still, I mean, you see that. I mean, we always talk about all those, reusability, maintainability, and things like that. But still, till today, I mean, still today we are facing these kind of problems. A lot of people spend a lot of time, lot of money. Companies are spending too much time and too much money on, achieving all those things and avoiding these kind of problems. So these are the, I mean, kind of symptoms of the bad code. Now, let me give you an example what coupling, or the kind of thing happens. Assume, right? I mean, for example, I'm just giving you this example because it happened with me. I mean, my car, uh, its power window stopped working recently. You know, so what happened is, I mean, I went to a mechanic. Just imagine you went to a mechanic and you showed, okay, I mean, my power window is not working, and he said, okay, I can fix it. And you left your car, and tomorrow, next day, you went and you just tried to start your car. So you realized, okay, your engine is not starting, but your power window, for example, I mean, some other thing is stopped working, and your power window is, working now. So now there was no relationship with the power window with the other thing which was working, right? So will you go to that same mechanic again? Never, right? So same thing happens with the software, right? I mean your customers. When they see they have provided some changes which are not relevant, which was not related basically, and you end up breaking something else. Now, with these kind of bad code, I don't know. I mean, I have faced this problem. Sometimes what happens, your management comes and say that, okay, don't touch this code because it is too fragile. If you change something, it will break something. So now imagine the business functions, right? Those who don't know about the technicality or the code and whatever we have written, they ask programmers to saying that you don't touch the code. This is the ultimate failure of the programmers, right? I mean, someone who don't know about the technicality of the code and he asks us to, don't touch the code. I mean, it happened in my previous organizations where we had a module and our higher level management, VP level people used to come and say, guys, I mean, please don't touch this code because I mean, we have developed it. And I mean, if you touch it, I mean, it will break somewhere else. And I mean, we cannot afford to have this kind of problems. So now this is the ultimate failure of the programmers as a developer, as a technical guy, that I mean, someone else who don't have any, knowledge about that, and they are asking us to not to touch that kind of code, right? So what is the reason behind all those kind of problems into the code? So as we discussed, right, the cause, the devil of all the cause is the coupling. So now this coupling, right, this is the problem with all kind of these issues. So basically, what is the software design? So the software design is simply managing these dependencies and figuring out where to put code and cutting down those dependencies, removing this kind of coupling to remove or to have, these kind of problems minimized. So how do we do that? That is the question. I mean, these are the problems we talk about now. How we will solve this kind of problem? That is the important point we should, think about. So now, I mean, this tree like thing is we just simply call it as a function called tree. So basically, when you write your code, right, you have some main function, then you have main calling high level modules, high level calling your middle level modules, and then it calls your low level modules. So the flow of control happens from top to bottom, right? From main is calling high, high is calling middle, and middle is calling low. So let me make it more simple. So in the next slide, I will tell you what exactly this means. So now here you can see this is a simple, a snapshot of that procedure function called tree. So here I have a module A and module B. Now module B is having a function named F and our module A is calling that function. So now you can see the flow is from the source control flow. Basically, the flow control is from module A to module B. And the source code is also dependent on basically F. I mean, my module A, this source code, this code is dependent on the module B. So how do we know that this module A is dependent on B, right? I mean, if I change something in module B or basically the function F, my module A is changed. So this is how we know. So how compiler knows basically how compiler knows basically there is a dependency. So this is because I mean we have written some lines of code into module A which is dependent on module B. Basically we include our in terms of C++ if we talk about, we include that b.h file into module A, or in terms of Java you can have import or something like that, right? So the moment you change F or module B, your module A has to recompile. This is, I mean, the kind of dependencies we generally have in our source code. Now, we saw that, I mean, the flow is from high to low. Now, just think about it. I mean, if anything changes at the low level module, your immediate upper level module has to, change. And then again, this flow all goes, from the opposite direction now, that everyone has to compile if anything at low level changes. So what kind of value or what kind of rule it is violated? Just think about it. So first question we should ask, do we really, I mean, want our high level module should be violated. I mean, just because of low level modules, if I'm changing a single line, for example, any string buffer, which is, you are being used into the low level module, if I change something into that, and because of that, I have to, recompile and everything, I have to do it again for my whole hierarchy. So if we change low level modules, everyone has to compile, right? So this follows from low to high. Basically, the source code dependency follows from low to high. It need to recompile and redeploy again, right? So now the question is, what how we can, solve this problem. So now nowadays we are talking about, I mean, almost every development we are having, which is, talks about object oriented principles and object oriented programmers. So what are these objects basically? Why so much, fuss nowadays about object oriented principles? So I mean you can see, I mean, these object oriented programmings are, around from quite many years, right? But still we have these kind of problems. So what is wrong with this? Where, I mean, if you talk to the programs that, okay, do you know object oriented principle or any object oriented language, they'll say yes, we know that. What is object oriented principle, what is object oriented language? But still, we have these problems today, even though these languages are, around from the, quite long times. So let's spend some time on the, what is basically encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism, and what is this object oriented principles are all about. So before, let's try to understand. So I mean, before any object oriented programming, like in C, do we have encapsulation in C? If you ask this question, so if you just go back and realize, C was having, C supported encapsulation like perfectly. I mean, it was the perfect encapsulation which was, supported by C. I mean, for example, let's take an example. You used to have your .h file, you just forward declaration, your function and your data structures, and, just and then you implement all those things into C file. So basically those becomes your translation unit. So only .h file is just, telling you how exactly this has to be used without revealing the details. But object-oriented languages like C++ and Java and any other languages, you just, I mean, I would say kind of, violated this in some or the other way. Like, for example, now in anything, you have got these words, right? I mean, public, private, protected, right? I mean, if you're hiding something and now you keeping your all data members into H file and saying this, okay, this is public, this is protected, and this is private. But still person can see, right? I mean, what all these things are, but you're just telling compiler, okay, I mean, these are private, protected, and things like that. So somehow, I mean, object oriented languages violated it. Now let's talk about, what about inheritance? I mean, can we achieve, I mean, was there this inheritance was present into C? You can say up to some extent, right? I mean, you can have two different structures, and then you can have common element, and at the bottom, you can using structure pointers, you can manipulate those common, elements and things like that. But it was hard to achieve in C. C++ made it, little convenient for us. So I mean, we had multiple inheritance in C++, and Java don't have any thought why Java don't have that multiple inheritance. So, I mean, if you just realize C++ could solve this problem, Java, just dropped that problem because they could not solve it because of this diamond shape ambiguity and things like that. So C, up to certain extents, I mean, C resolved this problem. C++ resolved this problem of multiple inheritance, but Java did not. Now, the third important, and that is the very important point, I mean, do we have polymorphism in C? You might be wondering how we can say polymorphism in C. So let's take a simple example. Like suppose you might have, almost everyone I might have written one copy program, right? I mean, where we want to say, okay, get some character from the standard input, and put it into the standard output. Now imagine when you connect, by default our the input device is keyboard and output device is basically our monitor, right? So now you just try to connect some other input device, right? You don't need to do anything. It will start working as it is if you want to give input, right? Or if you want to have some other output device, I mean, you just connect it to the system and it will simply work. right? So you don't need not to compile anything, right? It is a typical polymorphic behavior if you'll see with respect of C. So how this was implemented in C? I mean, if you'll just look at it. So I mean, if you just look at the device driver level, there are simply five functions which is already implemented and placed into the table, right? So always you go and read and invoke that function. So basically, operating system takes that, and they all have same signature and kind of things. So you just operating system places that address into that table, and that table is being referred, right? So that table is nothing but, I mean, with respect to C, that table is, I mean, have addresses of all those functions. With respect to C++, the table is called nothing but a virtual table, right? So this concept, polymorphism, this allow us to deal with the problem whatever we saw till now, right? I mean, module A and module B, these two are dependents. So this this polymorphism basically provide us the ability, or the capability to go against the control flow. Now imagine in the procedural function called tree, if you just can revert the source code dependency from you know A to B, it was there. Now you can just revert it back to B to A. Means now your A need not to know what exactly, I mean, A will not be dependent what is changed into B. So this polymorphism is one of the important concept which gives us the capability to go against the control flow. If you can go against the control flow, you can remove that dependency and you can, decouple your code. So that is the important point. I mean, if you have absolute control on the dependency structure, if you have, on those procedural tree, whatever we talk about, right? I mean, if you have absolute control on that dependency structure, you can write non-rigid, non-fragile, and non-reusable module. So you can get around what goes wrong with the software. So basically, the whole object-oriented is something, managing these dependencies by selecting inverting, I mean, basically changing the direction of the dependencies in your architecture. So that you can prevent all these problems, right? So you just want to change the direction of the error between the modules. That is all about, object oriented programming. So basically, to manage these kind of dependencies and inverting these dependencies in such a way that you can change the direction of the your errors between the module. So these solid principles basically uses this polymorphism concept to achieve all those things. So this polymorphism is basically one of the important point which is being used by these solid principles to avoid these kind of problems into the code. Where, I mean, by applying these things using this polymorphism concept, you can have your reusable code, maintainable code, and which is not fragile, which is not rigid. So we will see now how and I mean how these solid principles uses this polymorphism, and then, I mean, avoid these kind of problems. So now the solid principles are basically combined together called five principles. They have total five principles. I mean, this principles was given by mainly promoted by basically Robert C. Martin, Uncle Bob actually. So he gave these methodologies such as agile development and things like that. So you can read this definition somewhere. So mainly he promoted these principles, saying that by applying these kind of principle, you can write clean code. I mean, your code would be understandable, flexible, and maintainable. So let's look at these principles one by one and try to understand what exactly will happen if we violate this principle, and how we will refactor that code. So I have tried to kept code examples which is kind of real life examples, not something like shape or dime, I mean, shape or square. I have not kept those examples. I kept some examples from the real life examples where you can simply or easily correlate with those kind of examples, what will happen and things like that. So let's move to the first principle. The first principle, I mean, don't get confused when I have written here solid principles in C++. I mean, I just wrote because I mean I'm presenting it to the CPP India community. But these principles you can pretty much apply with any object-oriented languages. The core concept remains same. The only thing is C++ some guidelines, some code guidelines by default promotes these principles. So just that is the reason I have written solid principles in C++. So the first principle is single responsibility principle. So what does single responsibility means? Many times I have seen people, when you talk to people, right? I mean, what is single responsibility? So you might find people saying that single responsibility means class should have a single responsibility, and I mean, class should not change and things like that. So the important question we should ask ourselves: what, which responsibility? I mean, the class which we are writing, this is having responsibility towards whom? For whom this class is accountable? So we sometimes forget about this. So we should keep in mind that the single responsibility is towards someone. So basically, who is that for which this class is responsible for? So the thing is, our module or the class should only have one reason to change. When I say one reason to change, means who and from where these reasons are coming. So our class, whatever class we are writing, it should be responsible or responding to the changes which is coming from the same set of people or same group or same business unit. Not something like, I mean, all the places we are getting this request and our class is, change, just, getting random request and things like that. So we should always keep in mind this principle is about the people. I mean, who are those people, those, giving us the requirement to change. It is not something, this class itself has a responsibility. It is something, or it is about the people. This principle is specifically about the people, that whom this class should be responsible for. Now let's take a simple example here before I move into the code example. Now imagine you might have seen, you might have worked into some very small startup, and where just 10 to 20 people are there. So you might have seen there is one person who handles multiple responsibilities, right? I mean, your HR, account, or admin related kind of stuff that person handles. Now till 10 and 20 employees it is okay, right? I mean, but your organization is tend to grow. I mean, just imagine after 6 months or so you have got some 100 plus employees. Now all of a sudden you started feeling chaos, right? I mean, a lot of people are joining, a lot of people sending request related account, a lot of people sending request related HR, and all of a sudden this single person is kind of not able to manage this, right? So what is the solution? So obviously the simple solution, the best solution would be to have a person who is responsible for accounting, HR, admin, or whatever. So when your software grows, when your system grows, when your organization grows, right? At that point of time, your things changes. So whenever you're writing, right? I mean, so whenever writing your software, you should keep in mind. So this single responsibility principle says, the gist of single responsibility principle is that you should bring together all those things which changes for a same reason together, and separate out the things which changes for the different reason. So this is a single responsibility principle which provides such high cohesion. So now let's look at the code example. Now this is a very simple class, a request manager. So now imagine you are having some kind of speech recognition system. I'll take the example of speech recognition system. So imagine you have a request manager which just takes a request, and it sends, its work is to send that request and get the response. This is the only work of this request manager. But now here you can see, before sending this request, it is trying to format that request kind of parameter and things like that. It is adding into it and then sending this request to the respective cloud. I mean, basically we have some cloud server where this request will go and the response will come back. Now, what is the problem with this code? I mean, till you have one particular server where you want to send a request, everything looks fine. There is no problem. Now, imagine if you want to use, or there is a requirement after some time, okay, we want to use another cloud configuration, another cloud server, where we want to send a request and get the result. Now, with this kind of code, you can see it clearly violated that principle. The moment you have another requirement, you will end up writing that specific thing about the request for that particular server into this class. So your request manager has to refactor again. Now, due to that, you can't use this request manager anywhere else, right? And it is not generic. It is not specific to that particular cloud. So if you want to support that, that okay, uh, other cloud configurations also I should be able to support. So if you refactor it, probably you will see, I mean, you will start writing if conditions. Okay, if this is the configuration, then this is the request, this is configuration, this is the request, and then probably you will do all those things. But again, this will become a very specific, right? So this request manager becomes very specific. I mean, it is very a kind of rigid. I mean, anytime you are having a new request, you have to change it here, refactor this code again and again. So let's try to refactor that and let's see what happens. These are the problems basically. So now let's see what happens. So what we have done here, so we have introduced an interface, basically polymorphism. So we have introduced an interface which will take only the string and that format that request in the respective base, whatever we want to do. Now you have suppose a specific Google specific cloud, a Google specific request, so you can just implement this request formatter. So now your request manager class will be dependent on the request formatter rather than directly using this. So now you can use this request formatter and pass on whatever you know uh, specific request you will have related to specific servers. So in your previous class, this code will move into that particular part. So now if you different servers are using different requests, so they will implement that logic in their places. So your request manager will not change. It will simply use that request format, request formatter, and it is not going to, you are not going to have any kind of if conditions here. It is simply what kind of object you will pass there. I mean, because it becomes a kind of polymorphic object. So whatever request formatter you will pass, it will take care of that without changing, without impacting your request manager. So this is something, I mean, we should take care when we are writing, when we are designing our class, that we should take care of that. Okay, one class should be responsible for the changes which is coming from the one particular uh, group of people and set of people or set of business rules. Now, the second principle, which is open close principle. So Ivar Jacobson, he was a very famous, Swedish computer scientist. In 1992, he said all system changes during their life cycles. This must be borne in mind when developing systems expected to last longer than the first version. Most of the time we forget. I mean, we forget that this system will be there after the first release, right? So we should always keep these things in our mind that this system is going to change in future. The system will evolve after the first version. So softwares are tend to change. I mean, they will change. This thing we should keep in mind. So what does it mean? Let's look at this thing. I mean, what does it mean? What this principle says? So this principle says mainly your class or module, whatever you are writing, right? It should be open for extension and closed for modification. So what does it mean when I say open for extension and closed for modification? Means you should be able to extend the functionality without changing the or without modifying the existing thing. Now imagine you have one, you developed some module and tested, already deployed, everything is working fine. Now the moment you got some extension, some new request, and you have to change the existing one, you have to retest it again and you have to deploy it again. I don't think so people are going to do it. The best example for it, you can take any example of the softwares, like for example Microsoft Visual Studio or Eclipse, right? I mean, so what happens, I mean, when they release new feature, right, if they tell you, right, I mean, if you want to use this new feature, you have to reinstall the whole software again. I don't think so you are going to accept it, right? So it's very simple. I have installed that software, not whatever new feature you are giving, without changing or without redeploying it, retesting it, or whatever it was doing, without touching anything existing. I should be able to use the new features whatever is being released, right? Rather hold 4 GB of software again, I have to download, reinstall, and then I will be able to use it. I mean, this is not the thing which is expected. So adding new requirement without changing the existing code. So what happens? I mean, because we already tested our code, it is already tested, right? So this open close principle helps us, achieving the testability also. We will see how it helps us. Now let's look at the code example here. Now again, I mean, this is the request manager example which I took. Now, again, think that, I mean, currently I have my own cloud configuration with which, I mean, I have this interface and I have the request manager, which is currently now based on the request formatter. So whatever request comes from different places, it handles properly. There is no issue with it. And you can see that request manager is currently holding the concrete object of the my cloud configuration, basically, which is specific to me. Now imagine after some point of time, management takes comes and tell you, okay, guys, we want to integrate, AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. What will happen to this class? Now again, this request manager has to change. What will happen? Probably you might end up having other objects like my cloud, Google Cloud, Azure, or whatever here, and in the send request function you will be having those if and then else conditions. So how this thing should be avoided? And again, I mean, your request manager has to change. It will recompile, but it is already tested and deployed. So you will end up spending a lot of time again, right? So how to take care of this problem? Because this now here we can clearly see the violation of the open close principle. Because it is again, I mean, if I want to extend anything, I have to change this, which is the violation of the open close principle. So now let's see what happens if we introduce what they say. I mean, how we can manage this, how we can handle this. So now we have introduced an interface again here. So in this interface, now you can see when I want to introduce, and this interface I'm now using with my request manager class. You can see here where I'm using this cloud interface rather than any concrete class. So now whoever is implementing this cloud interface, right? Now I have currently my cloud, Google Cloud. Tomorrow I got the Azure or AWS. They will simply implement this interface, but whatever functionality, new functionality I am adding, right, it is not going to impact request manager because I am using the interface, right? I need not to have any if and else condition because this is again a polymorphic or basically polymorphic object. So there will be no if else condition. My request manager will keep on working same way. And now this is already tested, so need not to touch again. Only simply you will create new functionality. You will just compile that and deploy that. Now in the previous case here, right, you have seen my cloud. It knows this class knew about this particular class. So now this is not testable. I mean, because it needs a concrete object to test it. I mean, if you want to unit test this class, you can't test it because you need this my cloud concrete object. But the moment you have interface in between, your request manager is dependent on the interface. Now you can stub, right? You can fake your object and you can test this request manager directly. So now this increases your testability. I mean, you can unit test your request manager, right? So you can see, I mean, once we follow this open close principle by applying this, refactoring, you can clearly see my request manager is now a kind of not changing based on the, I mean, new requirement or new extension. So now I can use this request manager with any product, right? This can become a product. I can, if I want to use it, for example, speech recognition, request manager can be used for speech recognition related request. You have some other, for example, I mean, anything, any kind of request you want to send to any other kind of cloud. Request manager is not going to change. This is not impacted. This is once tested, everything is fine. You can just take it as it is and you can use it. There is no undesirable part of code which is there. And also it is simple to maintain because you don't have any kind of those bulky if else into the code. Those are being taken care into the interface level. So this is our open close principle. So now the third principle is list curve substitution principle. So I mean, this was again, I mean, Uncle Bob said, I mean, the subtypes must be substitutable for their base types. So what does it mean? I mean, why do we need to substitute our subtypes with their base types? Let's look at this example. First of all, what it says. So this says, I mean, basically this extends your open close principle and it enables us to replace our object of parent class with the object of subclass without breaking the application. So how it breaks the application if you don't follow this principle? This is one the important point of consideration we will see in the code. It says don't implement any strict validation rules on the input parameter then implemented by the parent class. So whatever rules is being implemented by your parent class, if you will change it into the subclass, you will not be able to replace it. So if you will not be able to replace it, what kind of problems you will face? This is all about this. This principle talks about that. Apply at least the same rules to the all output parameter as applied by the parent class. So again, whatever output parameters you are using, it should be we should try to keep it at least the same rules, because anything if you are changing between your parent class and the subclass, if you are changing validation rules and things like that, it is going to have an impact onto the code. Let's see what kind of code or what kind of impact we will have when we will this principle is violated. Now, as we were talking about the speech recognition system, right? So now I have a class, basically is recognition result class. So what happens? This class is being populated when we send a request to server, or basically any cloud server. When we send this request, and after getting that request is fulfilled, it sends some results. So this object is being populated based on that. Now, suppose I have currently, my own cloud recognition result class, which implements Zit interface and then Google Cloud recognition result interface. So I have this get confidence score method here. Now imagine for the cloud, for my configuration, it returns some range, right? It returns the confidence score value from 10 to 100, and for Google Cloud, it is something from 0 to 10. Now imagine when you are using this code, this method, when you're calling into your cloud code or something like that, right? So if you are specifically testing these kind of values, right? So you will end up again having the details which is specific to those configurations. Means what will happen? Again, you will end up revealing the details into the client code. So if anything changes, again, there is a problem. And if you add something else, then if that is returning some different value, then you have to again handle into the code separately. So what is the solution? What we should do in this case? So obviously, as I said, we should have a same sort of rules. So we can probably check, okay, this kind of this interface would be returning the range from this to this. So this range should be only I would be checking, not specific ranges which is written by these specific configurations. So with that, what will happen? You will not again having kind of things. You can simply replace your subtypes with the base type. Now let's move to the another example for the input parameters. Now again, I have this recognition request, right? So when we want to send a request to the server, so we have an interface where we want to set some sample rate. Okay, when you send some query for speech recognition, you have to send the sample rate of the audio, for example. So this interface takes that in hertz, basically those sample rate values. So now my server takes this request. The range is between 8,000 kilohertz to 16,000 kilohertz, and the Google server takes, for example, 8,000 kilohertz to 48,000 kilohertz. And probably you might have some other server, which is like, for example, AWS takes some other range. Now, the moment in your code you started checking these ranges, right? Okay, if this is a Google Cloud request, so this is the range. Now what happens? For example, if you don't check it, right? So any kind of sample rate, if you try to set, for example, cloud or something like that outside this range, you might get some exceptions. So if you are if you are handling those exception specifically for these kind of requests, you will end up having again a specific way of handling those errors, which is resulted by these specific configurations. So what would be the simplest solution for this? You can have some kind of check here. For example, what kind of limit you are going to set. So before passing it to the interface, you can check that, okay, this is between the range, basically the broader range, or not, rather than you're going specifically checking those ranges, which might result into again that wherever you are using these range checks or wherever you're writing this code, If something changes, again you will end up writing your if condition and else condition, and you will not be able to, the moment you will pass some other object, some other kind of cloud configuration, you will end up changing the code again. So this is something which this is all about, Liskov substitution principle, that you should implement the same sort of rule for your subclasses so that you can replace them with, your base classes, base objects, basically to follow that complete polymorphic behavior. And let's move to the fourth principle, which is interface segregation principle. So the interface segregation principle says clients should not be forced to depend upon the interface that they do not use. I mean, you might have seen most of the time when we design interfaces, basically these abstract classes in C++ and all. So we just, trying to put some functions, and then when we, implement those interfaces, there are some interfaces for which we cannot provide the meaningful implementation, but we still have those implementation into our, in the base class, basically in the interface. So this principle says you should not have any kind of interfaces which you cannot provide a meaning, or you should not be dependent on the interface which for which you cannot provide a meaningful implementation. Means, rather than, it's very simple. I mean, no one should be forced to depend upon the interface that they do not use. If you're not using an interface, why you should be implementing it? So I have seen when people write code, they just push some interfaces, and in some of the classes, and this kind of things happens. For example, when you have an abstract class, in that, have some virtual functions, some data, and then probably when you're trying to implement it, I mean, you just simply see that some class which is trying to implement this, it is having an empty interface implementation of that function. So if my class is not, dependent on that, why I should be forced to implement it? So that is what this principle says. So I mean, when you have such kind of interfaces, and when these interfaces become fat interface phase, where implement whoever is implementing them, they are, forced to implement, it is better to, break them into these smaller interfaces. So now let's look at the code example with the same line. So now suppose I have a audio device manager. So basically this device manager, what it does, it provides the functionality that whatever audio devices, like for example, you can have audio devices to, record your voice, and then a speaker and those kind of devices you have. So this device manager provides a functionality. You can, read from the device and write to the device buffers, basically. Now I have my input device. Okay. Now if I want to, use this interface, so you can see the moment I will implement this interface, I will end up having all those interfaces implemented into the class which I am not even using it, because this is my input class. Now imagine why input device manager should even implement the uh, uh, right functionality. It don't have this right functionality. So this, if these kind of situations are there, we should, segregate these interfaces into the smaller interfaces. Now let's look at the refactored code here. Now here you see this audio device manager. Now we have broken it somewhere, like those common functionality like start and stop will be there for all the devices. Now you have a audio input device manager interface, audio output device manager interface. So now read and write goes separately. Now suppose my device input device manager, now whatever input device I am using, if it only needs, read, it can simply, add this audio device manager and audio input device manager. It is not going to implement the write interface because it don't need. Now if you have some device which is both input and output, you can obviously implement all these three interfaces, it can have those functionality. So you can see this flexibility now, right? That these interfaces now clearly defined. My class can provide a well-defined implementation for that, and I will not be having anything for which I am not able to provide any meaningful implementation. So that is how it says. I mean, when you design your interfaces, you should take care that if whoever is using it, they should be able to provide, the meaningful implementation. They are not forced to implement something which they do not use. So the last principle, which is basically dependency inversion principle. So this principle says your high level module should not be dependent upon the low level modules. Both should be dependent upon the abstraction, basically the interfaces. And abstraction should not be dependent on the details. Details should depend on the abstraction. So what does it mean? What does it this dependency inversion principle means? So basically, this helps us to achieve low coupling or loose coupling basically. So you can see, I mean, when we have a tight coupling, right? So we have more interdependency, more coordination, and information flow. So with following this principle, I mean, it helps us to achieve loose coupling. So let's see with the code example how it will help us to achieve this. Now, again, this is a very simple example where I have a file uploader class basically, which uploads my audio input for the speech recognition, and it is using my interface, basically my class, my cloud, which needs basically a 16-bit PCM audio to process it and to give me the recognition result. Now, everything looks okay till we are using this my specific cloud configuration. Now you can see the violation of the dependency inversion principle here, because we are specifically talking about the low level details into the file uploader class. I mean, the moment your file uploader class will start uploading, it has to invoke this function that uploads 16-bit PCM audio. But now imagine you have another configuration, another cloud server from Google or Azure, or AWS. They might have a different format altogether, right? So now what will happen? So first of all, the principle says that you should not be dependent on the low level module. You should be dependent on the abstraction instead, right? So let's see what does it mean. So now we have an abstraction, or we have an interface with which we have this method, and now my cloud configuration or whatever my cloud class implements this, and my file uploader class uses this. Now you might see that we started using interface, but it might look okay, but still there is a problem with this, right? Even though we are dependent on the interface, still there is a problem. Now imagine I have AWS cloud, okay, and now it will implement cloud interface now. So now again it will be forced to implement this upload 16-bit PCM audio, which is the violation of the previous principle, because it cannot provide, I mean, that might be supporting 32-bit PCM audio, right? But it will be forced to implement this, right? So it simply just by adding those include files and things like that, and start implementing is not going to help. It is again revealing the low level detail. Means why my file uploader class should know about what kind of audio I'm going to deal with, or what kind of cloud server I'm going to use. So how to deal with this problem, how to fix this problem? So now you can see my cloud interface should not reveal even the in the name. So when we are designing the interfaces, the naming of the interfaces, we should also be careful how we are naming our interfaces. Now you can see my file uploader class will only know that, okay, the file path, and that's it. It need not to be dependent on it. I mean, basically when I call start upload class, it don't know anything what kind of function I am calling, or anything is going to change or things like that. It's simply you know not revealing any kind of detail. It is purely based on the interface now. So now whoever is coming and implementing this interface, they will just implement the this method, and whatever specific logic they want, they will have it in them. But my file uploader class is simply dependent, or simply only will know about the file path, not other things. So this is our last principle. So what are the takeaways basically? So now you might have observed, I mean, in this overall solid principles, we focused on one particular thing. That was polymorphism, using obviously inheritance. So polymorphism is one of the thing you might have observed we have used across all the 5 principles. So this polymorphism, you can see how it provided, the kind of control over the source flow, or the source control flow, how it gave us the control that we can revert those source code dependencies based on those interfaces, so that if anything changes, extended or modified, it remains with wherever we are things, rather than impacting the things which already tested, deployed, and properly. We are handling those things. So basically, solid principles enables us to get agility. Basically, using these principles, you can see we can how fast we can develop things, right? If we look and if we try to follow these principles, then solid, as I said, right, solid is indirectly promoted by C++ core guidelines. And if you go and check these guidelines, what they say is, like, for example, C++ 121 says, right, this guideline promotes, this says, when you are developing your interfaces, please avoid keeping data into the pure abstract classes and things like that. It should be a pure interface. So that is how, you see, if you read about these kind of guidelines, so these guidelines now promote these solid principles indirectly, and this solid results in testable code. We have the example in the open close principle, where how we got that, our testable class, which was not earlier testable, and because it was knowing the concrete class, then changing it, using the interfaces, how we can make it unit testable and things like that. So now you can see overall, you have seen overall, by following these principles, how it helps us to achieve, avoiding writing rigid code and fragile code and non-reusable code. We have seen those examples, like in the request manager, how by changing and refactoring that, keeping all those principles in mind, can be used into some other product, and it can be part of product, can be used into different projects and things like that. So yes, with all these things, I think I am on time. I'll just keep a pause here, and if you have any questions, probably you can shoot your questions before I hand over to Shilpa. Anyone, any question?
No, I think it is quite impressive and good.
I have one question, Harishankar.
Yes.
Won't polymorphism and introduction of virtual functions slow down our system in any way?
That's a very good question. So mainly what you're talking about, the performance, right?
Yep, yep.
Okay. So now we have to look it from the mm, various perspective. Okay. For example, how much cost you will save by achieving few CPU cycles. Let's take this example. Okay. For example, when you are introducing virtual functions and this polymorphic behavior, so how many CPU cycles you are going to save as compared to the cost which you are going to incur on the maintenance and writing wrong software, which is not maintainable, not reusable, and things like that.
Yep.
So again, the performance, obviously you should save when you can, right? But what are the trade-offs you are going to have just using something which says, okay, it is not performance oriented. And to be very frank, it is not that much slow. If I'm sure, right, it is not
Okay.
that much slow that you cannot use it, right?
Yep.
Obviously, if it is something that you are using something wrongly, right, you have where you could avoid, but
Yep.
you specifically, see, I'll tell you, this is something like, you should not use something just for the sake of using it. Okay.
Hmm.
Like, okay, I know modern C++, there are a lot of features which is good, right? And I am just using, even though I don't need to use them. Okay.
Yep.
So that is a thing. We should always we should always look at the kind of cost trade-offs, and what we are going to achieve with how much we can save. I mean, there are a lot of things are involved, right? I mean, and I have seen, and that is why, I mean, this is one of the thing when we talk about dynamic dispatch, right? I mean, in languages like Python, you see, I mean, we achieve this dynamic dispatch without using inheritance, right? You don't need to
Yeah.
use inheritance in Python. So you might see some more optimization on that front in future in C++, but I would say, I mean, it is not that, yeah, obviously it includes some cost, but I think that is quite negligible as compared to, the kind of, if you are totally not using it just because of performance, you will end up, having kind of softwares where, you will have lot of problem in terms of maintenance, in terms of writing again and again, and in terms of having, maintainable cost and things like that. I think it is quite negligible in that sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope this
I would
answers
like
your
to add,
question.
Hari. Hello?
yeah,
Uh,
Harish, I
yeah.
would like to add one more point here. Shilpa, if you do not want to use polymorphism, then from C++ 17, we do have variant and visit.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
using that, you can do that. But again, that variant is kind of union, so you are wasting the memory. So at the end, this all boils down to, I mean, time and space complexity, which is always inversely proportional and very hard to find a balance in between.
Yeah.
So
But
that's what I
yeah,
said, right? I mean, Vishal, that's what I'm just, that's what it is. Always depends, right? I mean, by sacrificing what more you are going to gain, more you are going to achieve, right? So it's all a kind of, good balance where you want to use what and what you are going to achieve.
yes, absolutely.
Yep.
I would like to add, Harishankar, I would just
Yes,
like to add just another point is
yes,
that like yes, it also depends on the application area. Like if I talk in terms of high frequency trading, then yes, the CPU cycle do matter. But
yes.
if I talk about in terms of web services where requested response is to be sent, then
Mm-hmm.
saving few milliseconds won't do any good. So because users at the end user won't be able to like see those changes, that difference. So application
See,
areas maybe.
see, I'll tell you, that's what I'm saying. What kind of, like, for example, let me give you an example. Okay. Now we have exceptions in C++, right? Okay.
Yes.
C++, we
Yes.
have exception mechanism. Okay. So now exception mechanism, just because we know exception mechanism exists into C++, that does not mean we should use it. Okay. Now, for example, there is a clear cut understanding a programmer or a project or the team should have, that where you don't want to use and where you will not use exception. For example, any time critical application, right? Where your time is very important rather than other thing. Fine. I mean, your exception might provide you, exception handling might provide you a better way of transferring your code control and things like that, better way of handling things and all error and all. Fine, absolutely fine. But if your system is time critical, right, you cannot
Hello.
use. Hello, hello.
Maybe there was a network glitch at my side.
Yeah.
Can
You
you?
are.
Okay, so when you have a time critical embedded system, right, you cannot use exception handling there because there is no tool till today which says, okay, I mean, how much time it will take from the when exception occurred to the handling that at the handler level, right? So you cannot predict that time. So now if you want to use your exception handling mechanism because you know it, not going to serve any purpose. You should, so as a programmer, you should know where you want to use what. Just for the sake of using it, you're not going to use it. It purely depends on the the kind of application you are dealing with and what you want to save, in what respect, in terms of cost, in terms of performance. Like I have seen in some of the examples, right, where I mean, spending few CPU cycles are okay if your code looks more clean and neat. I've seen projects are doing it. So that way. Okay. I hope I answer
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
question.
I
Yeah.
clearly understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, guys? If not, then probably.
I think Silpa has some network problem.
Okay.
So thanks Hari for this wonderful presentation. And everyone, please give us your feedback about the session. The form is already shared in the chat section, and you will also receive a mail regarding this feedback form. And if anyone had not registered yet to CPP India, please fill this form, CPP India registration form. It will help you to get updated about what's happening in the community, and please don't forget to give us feedback. So
Just sorry to interrupt you, Dheeraj. Just guys, I'm sorry. I mean, I just had my presentation stopped. So anyone, I mean, want to, I mean, if you are still seeing my screen, I mean, these are my contact details. If you have any further questions, queries, you can reach out to me anytime. I will be happy to help you and answer your questions.
okay, so that's all for today. So happy weekend.